Welcome back to Popping Off with Corn Pop. I am the only host who still thinks that equity is something you build in a house, not something that the government redistributes after it burns your house down. Well, tonight we cover the week of August 16th through the 22nd, 2026. And, well, we've got a lot of stuff to cover. The economy grew. Iran lost more control of the Strait of Hormuz. A mother who killed her 3 kids got the full therapeutic media package. The Democratic Socialists of America kept proving that it's the actual brain of the Democratic Party. And finally, a few red states started looking at taxing data centers so that regular people can finally stop getting crushed by property taxes. All of this through the only lens that still works. Making fun of the people who are wrong. Let's go pop off. Well, we got some more economic data this week, and brace yourselves, because the American economy is still growing. Real GDP has been positive for multiple quarters in a row. It appears that consumer spending is carrying the weight. It does also seem that business investment in equipment is very solid. Unemployment is sitting in the low 4s, the very low 4s. Productivity is doing the quiet work that no one on cable news seems to want to talk about because it doesn't fit this narrative that everything is collapsing. Now, you would think that this would be good news. But instead, the professional left is treating this growth like a personal insult. When the numbers were mediocre under the previous administration, it was called resilience. Now, when the numbers are better under the current administration, it's vibes. It's temporary. It's only helping the rich. These are the same people who for 4 years were telling us that we needed massive government spending to stimulate the demand. Now go look at the actual demand. Now they look at the actual demand, and then they act suspicious. Growth is only legitimate if it happens under the correct political branding. If it happens under the wrong political branding, guess what? It's an illusion. It's a statistical trick. Or it's proof that we're all secretly suffering. Now, we've all seen this movie before. It's the same movie where inflation is transitory until grocery bills are permanently higher, and then suddenly the problem is corporate greed. Instead of the people who printed the money. Because they're never, ever going to simply say the economy is growing and that's good. That sentence is way too clear. Clarity is the enemy. Now, while the economic numbers were being ignored, something more interesting was happening over in the Persian Gulf. Now, over the last few days, it appears as though Iran is losing effective control of the Strait of Hormuz. Shipping data from the last 2 weeks shows that the majority of oil and gas tankers using the Omani side routes and dark transit that Tehran simply cannot police the way it wants. the IRGC's preferred corridor, where they get to play tax or toll collector and traffic cop, and sometimes they want to play pirate, it appears that's no longer the only game in town. U.S. and allied naval presence has made the alternative routes viable. Now, of course, Iran still has the ability to harass and disrupt these routes, but it appears as though the days of Iran dictating terms to the entire global energy market are slipping. This is the same Iran that the foreign policy establishment spent 20, 30 years treating as an inevitable regional superpower that we just had to manage carefully. That's the same crowd that told us maximum pressure never works. And they are now watching American naval power quietly change this map. And they're trying to pretend not to notice. Right? Because it's funny how don't poke the bear turns into, wait, the bear is losing its favorite fishing hole. The moment that the United States stops treating Iran leverage as permanent, the left's foreign policy geniuses spent years trying to explain to us why we had no choice but to live with Iranian control of that waterway. But apparently it turns out we did have a choice. We just had to stop asking permission. Now, closer to home, the Lindsay Clancy murder trial continued this week in Massachusetts. This is the Duxbury, Massachusetts mother who strangled her 3 children. Cora, age 5, Dawson, age 3, and Callan, 8 months old. This happened in January in 2023, and she's on trial. The defense is running the postpartum psychosis argument pretty hard. Now, supporters in pink have been gathering outside the courthouse. Expert witnesses, long medication lists, and this familiar claim that she was not really present when she killed her own kids. Now, don't get me wrong. Postpartum psychosis is real. It is horrific. I'm not here to pretend that mental illness is invented, right? What I am here to point out is the speed and selectivity of the empathy. 3 dead children. A sequence of events that required planning, sending the husband out of the house, using exercise bands, one by one. And the cultural conversation still tilts toward the mother's suffering as the primary story. And this is the same activist class who will lecture you for weeks about lived experience and believe all women. Suddenly they discover nuance, trauma, and systemic medication failure. The moment that these victims are children and that the perpetrator fits a preferred demographic of suffering. If the facts were reversed, if it were different politics, or even if it were different identity markers, the same voices would be screaming for the maximum sentence before the body bags were even zipped. That double standard is the story, not the diagnosis. The selective empathy. Some killers get the full therapeutic package. Others get the brick wall. The deciding factor is rarely the evidence. It's just a narrative. Well, the midterms are less than 3 months away, and the Democratic Socialists of America, well, they're having a moment. That moment means that membership has surged past 120,000. They have mayors. They're knocking off incumbents in these primaries. They just updated the platform again. Abolish the Senate. Abolish ICE. Full amnesty. Public ownership of major corporations. Subordinate the presidency and the courts to Congress. The usual greatest hits. But now those hits are delivered with more confidence and seems to be better branding. This is the organization that mainstream Democrats spent years treating as a quirky left flank instead of the actual energetic core of the party. Now, those same Democrats are watching the DSA endorsed candidates win and discovering, shock, that the radicals were serious the whole time. The left's version of the base is fired up is a group that thinks that the United States Senate is an undemocratic relic and that borders are a form of violence. And the voters notice. When the loudest energy on one side of the aisle is openly socialist and the other side is still arguing about tax rates and energy production, well, my personal opinion, but the midterms start looking less like a referendum on the president and more like a referendum on whether America still wants to be a normal country. And finally, today, a few conservative states are looking at a simple, practical idea. Tax the massive data centers that big tech keeps building, and then use that revenue to eliminate or sharply reduce property taxes on regular people's homes. Crazy, right? Now, these data centers suck up enormous amounts of land, power, and water. These are cash cows for the companies that own them. So some red states are saying, okay, fine. You want to plant $1 billion server farm here? Well, then guess what? You're going to help pay for that privilege. And we're going to take the money, and we're going to take that money, and we're going to take the boot off of the homeowners' necks. And what's the progressive response? Well, seems as though it's been predictable and honestly quite hilarious. Because suddenly the same people who spend all day screaming about taxing the rich are clutching their pearls because someone might actually tax a different kind of rich. The kind that builds giant air-conditioned warehouses full of computers instead of living in a normal house. They warn that local services will collapse. They call it corporate welfare in reverse. They act like property taxes are some sort of sacred moral good instead of a government lien on the roof over your head. Now notice this pattern. Okay? Notice this pattern. When red states try to stop taxing the family home into the ground by shifting some of that burden onto massive commercial data centers, the left suddenly discovers a sudden deep attachment to the old system. Consistency is for the little people. Well, that's the week. The economy kept growing while the professional worriers kept worrying. Iran's chokehold on Hormuz weakened while the foreign policy establishment seemed to pretend not to notice. We also had a mother who killed her 3 children, continued to receive the full therapeutic media treatment. And, you know, the DSA kept proving that it is, yet again, the energetic core of the modern Democratic Party, which, by the way, the left is saying isn't happening. And then also we had a handful of states that started looking at taxing data centers so that regular homeowners might actually finally catch a break. You know, the left's problem is not that the news is bad, right? The left's problem is that too much of the news refuses to cooperate with the narrative. Okay? Because growth is happening. Leverage is shifting. Voters are watching. And every time the DSA updates its platform, you know, it just seems like a few more normal people remember why they stopped trusting the people who keep telling them that the real problem is that America isn't progressive enough yet. Well, that's the show. Be sure to tip your waitress, hug your kids, and for the love of God, stop letting the professional left define what counts as compassion. See you next week.